provide the type of body armor it determines would be most suitable for the protection of its employees engaged in emergency medical services. Introduction number 904, also introduced by Minority Leader Borelli, would require the fire department to provide a de-escalation and self-defense training to its employees who provide medical services. Such training would be available at least once per calendar year. And Introduction 1167, introduced by Councilmember Dinowitz, would require the Commissioner of Emergency Management, in consultation with the Office of the Mayor and the community boards, to identify and designate facilities within each community district to serve as rapid emergency response centers. Each center would be required to stock supplies for residents that have been displaced by a natural human-caused disaster. This bill would also require the Commissioner of Emergency Management, in consultation with the Commissioner of Citywide Administrative Services, to submit an annual report to the Mayor and to the Speaker of the City Council regarding the inventory of supplies in each community district's Rapid Emergency Response Center. The collection of legislation will provide additional support and protection to our brave New Yorkers who work to provide emergency medical services. I'd like to thank all those from the public as well that are here as representatives from the administration who are here to provide testimony. I will now turn the microphone over to Minority Leader Borelli for his opening remarks.
Thank you, Chairwoman. It's nice to see you with the gavel that I held for a couple of years. It was a lot of fun. Last September, EMT Captain Allison Russo, a 24-year veteran of the FDNY, was standing outside of her station in Astoria, Queens. Unfortunately, we know the results of what happened that day. She was brutally stabbed to death. Unfortunately, the number of attacks on EMTs has significantly risen since 2020. There were 168 attacks on EMTs in 2018. That number doubled to 386 in 2021. So far this year, through July, 121 attacks have been committed on our EMTs. We know our EMTs are, for better or worse, whether they want to be or not, they are the front line of our service delivery in our city. The goal of these two bills, Intro 903 and Intro 904, will be to protect them in a way that we've done, or we've tried to do in the past, but not done a very good job. We know the FDNY currently provides body armor in many cases to many EMTs, but this bill would require specific gear fit and sized for individual EMTs so that they can have the best protection possible. Intro 904 would require the department to provide self-defense and de-escalation training. And I recognize that it's not the goal of this department or any fire department to have to deal with self-defense tactics and techniques amongst members of an entity that doesn't routinely deal with violent people. Nonetheless, we're at the point in our city's history where, with hundreds of attacks each year on EMTs, we simply have no choice. So I thank the chair for hearing this bill, and I thank the department for weighing in.
Thank you, Minority Leader. I now turn to Eric Dinowitz, who will speak on his bill.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. I'm proud to be here this morning to advocate for Bill 1167, which was introduced by myself along with Councilmember Riley at the stated meeting of September 14th, 2023, and thank you, Chair Ariola, for putting this on the agenda. This bill requires the Department of Emergency Management to identify and designate facilities within each community district to serve as rapid response centers that would stock supplies for residents that have been displaced by natural or human-caused disasters. The bill was inspired by our experience on the scene of a building fire in the Wakefield section of the Bronx earlier this year. While on the scene, Councilmember Riley and I learned that 61 individuals were displaced from their homes that evening with few city resources to fall back on. We were in the school together, was the emergency site where we all met, and sure, they had food, but they didn't have clothing or other materials for the next day, things students needed to get to school the next day, clothing adults needed to get to work the next day. It just so happened, luckily, that in Senator Bailey's office, in Councilmember Riley's office, and at the school, they happened to have clothing available for some people. But we can't be a city that relies on luck or on circumstance. We have to ensure that we are providing the resources necessary so in the case of an emergency, in the case of a disaster, people have the support and the materials that they need to, as best as they can, move on with their lives. And as the year progresses, the need for these emergency response centers becomes increasingly urgent. The rapid flooding of our city in September, on top of the proliferation of fires citywide, underscore the imperative to provide material support to affected communities, many of whom are among our city's most vulnerable. In addition, of course, as climate change continues to progress, reports show that as many as 40% of New Yorkers, particularly low-income New Yorkers, will fall victim to displacement as a result of flooding, storm surges, and rising sea levels. With emergency relief centers, we can empower our city to take swift and concrete action in the face of unpredictable disasters. I want to once again thank Chair Ariola and the members of the Committee on Fire Emergency Management for the opportunity to speak today, and encourage all my colleagues to join the 18 other co-sponsors on this bill, Intro 1167.
Thank you. I'd like to acknowledge that Councilmember Kagan is here. And now I will turn the mic over to Will Hongesh.
Thank you, Chair. We'll now hear testimony from Chief Michael Fields of the New York City Fire Department Bureau of Emergency Medical Services. Before we begin, I will administer the affirmation. Please raise your right hand. Right hand. Do you affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth before this committee, and to respond honestly to council member questions? I do. Thank you.
Good morning, Chair Ariola, members of the Fire and EMS, Fire and Emergency Management Committee, and the sponsors of today's legislation. My name is Michael Fields, and I'm the Chief for the Emergency Medical Service for the City of New York, FDNY. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today about legislation being considered by the Council. Right? Introduction 903 will require the Fire Department to provide body armor to all emergency medical service members. Under the legislation, the body armor shall meet a ballistic resistance or stab resistance standard of the National Institute of Justice or any successor standards. No employee shall be permitted to retain the body armor after leaving the fire department or moving to a position that does not involve the provision of emergency medical service. The fire department currently makes ballistic vests available to all EMS members. Each new member is fitted for a vest upon leaving the EMS Academy. Replacement vests are made available every 5 years. The safety of EMS members is paramount. We agree with and are supportive of this legislation. Introduction 138 will require the fire department to provide vehicle insurance, access to medical supplies, and ambulance driver training for volunteer ambulance services. Volunteer companies operate outside of the FDNY and, generally speaking, do not participate in the 911 system. We have great admiration for the volunteers who operate these services and the work they perform. Some volunteer companies have been stepped up to provide support to the department during extraordinary circumstances, such as during COVID pandemic, and we are grateful for that. From a fiscal standpoint, the requirements of this legislation will be very challenging to fulfill. By our calculations, there are approximately 30 volunteer ambulance services operating in New York City. They are of various sizes. Some operate consistently, and some may only operate on certain days of the week or when volunteers are available. The initial cost to outfit a basic life support ambulance with supplies is approximately $80,000. This includes hard equipment such as defibrillators, splints, boards, and scopes, as well as soft equipment such as bandages and oxygen masks. The cost increased to approximately $125,000 for an advanced life support ambulance, which is used for response to more acute calls. There are additional costs to maintain appropriate levels as supplies are used in the field. Providing driver training for voluntary companies will also be costly as well as operationally challenging. The EMS Academy on Fort Totten is used for incoming classes of EMTs as well as for refresher courses. Training for members to maintain certification and advanced instructions for paramedics and EMS officers. As the committee is aware, we have expanded our Fort Totten facility in recent years to better accommodate larger EMS classes and training, using FDNY facilities to provide the training of all volunteer drivers in New York City will displace FDNY personnel training and necessitate increased overtime for instructors. Finally, obtaining insurance policies for volunteer ambulance would be extremely costly, particularly since City of New York is self-insured and the FDNY does not operate under vehicle insurance. Extending this benefit to volunteer companies will create a liability for the city and for taxpayers. This will be a questionable use of resources, given that the department does not monitor voluntary drivers, has no insight into their operation or ongoing activities, and has no way of incentivizing or enforcing safe operations. The New York City Law Department also has concerns about potential liabilities associated with this legislation. Though we value the work of volunteer companies and the women and men who volunteer their time to serve their communities, it will be extraordinarily difficult for the fire department to comply with Introduction 138 if it was to become law. Introduction 904 will require the fire department to develop de-escalation and self-defense training for all emergency medical services. The training would be required to address the unique characteristics and operations of emergency medical service with a particular focus on violent situations in the context of patient care. It should include recognition and understanding of mental illness and distress, effective communication skills, conflict de-escalation techniques, and self-defense techniques. The department will be required to offer this training no less frequently than one per calendar year. I mentioned this point earlier, but it bears repeating. The fire department values the safety of our members above all else. In the past 5 years, we have experienced tragedy twice, losing 2 EMS members to violence that they experienced while on duty. De-escalation and self-defense training is necessary, and the department does provide this type of training. EMS members participate in a 12-hour training regimen that is conducted in partnership with New York City H&H. The program is focused on situational awareness, de-escalation techniques, managing patients who are experiencing a mental health crisis, and patients who are potentially violent. In addition, members receive instructions on contacting others for assistance during an escalating situation or emergency, including communicating with law enforcement. The training that we provide now does not comply with the provisions of Introduction 904 that will require it be offered annually. However, the department does offer a portion of that training on the LMS system, which is available in all EMS stations at any time. We are always exploring ways to make our members safer, so we are happy to continue engaging with the council to develop a version of this legislation that is satisfactory for all. I will be happy to take any questions at this time.
Just like to note that we've been joined by Councilmember Yeger. So thank you for your testimony, and I'm very happy to see that you are in favor of a number of the bills, but I see that you have some issues with 138, and Councilmember Yeger's here. So I just have a couple of questions, and then I'll yield to you, because I do think that it's very important for us to give training to our volunteer fire and ambulance corps. I have 5 in my district alone, and they could use the help. So what type of training does the department provide for to individuals who are drivers of ambulances? In respect to the EMS, fire department.
So in respects to EVOC, we offer evasive vehicle operational course. That is a 4-day course in which we teach them the operations of ambulances, how to avoid accidents, pretty much vehicle defensive driving for ambulances.
And how many, and you said it was 12 hours, you said?
It's over a 3-day course. One is in-day, and then there's 2 days that's field operations.
And do all EMS personnel receive this training, or just drivers?
Every EMS worker receives the training. We don't have drivers, ambulance drivers. They're all EMTs or paramedics.
Okay. And does a shift have a designated driver for each ambulance?
Yes. So either one of the members can drive. They make that determination based on operational needs.
Okay. Do you know how many volunteer ambulance companies that are recognized by the fire department in this city? In the
I
5
believe I gave
boroughs?
testimony that there are 30, and 17 of them assist in 911 operations whenever called upon.
And you provide those services to these recognized volunteer fire and ambulance companies, or no?
You're saying, can we or did we? I'm sorry.
Do you?
No, we do not.
You recognize them, but you don't want to give them any training? You haven't?
We have not given them any training. Okay. We do recognize that they are community-based. They are definitely a part of the community system. Anytime that we had an epidemic or a pandemic, we asked NICEM to activate the mutual aid, for which they in turn, sometimes they can assist, other times they can't. Logistically, we cannot provide the services to them because we don't have enough real estate barely for our members. So during these fiscal times, in order for us to train or upstaff so that we can provide EVOC services to 30 ambulance companies that volunteer, that will be a lot of money that we have to push out, a lot of resources, a lot of staffing power that we have to put out, and more importantly, we don't have the real estate. We lost some buildings recently, one being a building inside of Fort Channel, which we did the Be Heard training at, and then we lost another building to United States military at Fort Totten. So the resources that we have right now to do the actual classes have decreased, as well as the EVOC field. Even though we expanded on it, we expanded to accommodate the 200 members that we push out each class. Now to be adding an additional load to that, I don't think that we can sustain it right now.
But if you rely on them, wouldn't it be in your best interest to train them so that they go with the same policy and procedure that the FDNY uses?
So,
as a common sense precaution?
I don't think so. I don't think that that's the common sense precaution to it. I believe that even though we call on them for times of need, every EMT inside the state of New York operates under New York State protocol. So for them to be an EMT, they need to have certain trainings that come along with their community-based ambulance corps. I don't believe that the fire department is indeed responsible for making sure that they have that training.
Where do they get that training now? Would be private companies, maybe they pay for it.
Correct, they get it through whatever private company or community college that offers EMT courses. We train our own at FDNY. I'm not quite sure where they get their training from.
Councilmember Yeger, did you have questions?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Morning, how are you?
Good morning.
Okay, I'm not going to speak to all the volunteer ambulance corps in the city, and I understand there's 2 dozen, maybe 3 dozen, but there's one that I'm very familiar with, and I'm sure you're familiar with. It's Hatzalah. I'm sure you've heard of it.
I have.
Okay. Hatzalah, every single day, responds to 250 calls that result in transports to hospitals. There are many thousands of more emergency calls that Hatzalah responds to that are not transports, that are simply providing assistance on the site and don't result in a transfer to a hospital. That's about 65 to 75,000 calls a year. Those are calls that would otherwise go to the 911 system, where an FD ambulance would have to respond. So while I recognize the cost implications in your testimony, and I understand that these things cost money, but it's also a fact, I think, and I don't think it's a disputable fact, that the existence of these volunteer corps, and particularly the one that I am most familiar with, result in a cost savings to the city. In other words, if tomorrow morning these 2 to 3 dozen ambulance corps would no longer exist, 911 would collapse. The fire department system would not be able to respond to the influx of calls that would now have to flow to 911 instead of going to the volunteer ambulances that are doing these transports. So given that, and I don't think, like I said, it's disputable, and for sure you're here and you feel free to dispute it if you wish, isn't it ultimately a cost savings to the taxpayers?
All right, so I do not believe that the 911 system would collapse if we took on an additional 65,000 calls. I believe that the EMTs and the paramedics within the New York City Fire Department, as well as how it's managed, will be able to take on those calls. We are extremely grateful for the work that Hatzola does inside their communities, as well as throughout the city, right? We are we are thankful for any community-based ambulance that decides to lobby their community for donations, and then they provide voluntary services to those communities so that they can assist with the 911 system. I do, undisputable, believe that, yes, it is definitely, you do assist with the call volume, and we are appreciative towards that. Is it a cost savings? I don't believe so. First off, somebody would have to tell me how many personnel does Hatzola, as well as every community ambulance corps has. You may have some, you may have some places in which they have 2 voluntaries, and you may have other places that may have 1,000. Of those 1,000 volunteers that they have, how many of them actually volunteer and does service work within those communities? Some just show up once every year or so to say, I did a tour on the ambulance. But the fire department would then be responsible for to ensuring that each one of those members that say that they are a volunteer, whether at Hatzola, whether at Bravo, whether at Prospect Park Ambulance, whether at Central Park Ambulance, were trained. I think that is a heavy lift. I don't think that that's cost savings. Additionally, how many ambulances do each one of these have? We are self-insured. What's the average insurance policy for an ambulance on a daily basis? And then you have to take into account what is their DMV record, right? So if somebody who has more violations than others, therefore the insurance is going to go up. So right now, just in the world of utopia, I don't think that that is indeed a cost savings that gets offset by the 65,000 calls in which Hatzola does. By no means am I asking that you lobby towards Hatzola and tell them to stop.
I appreciate that, Chief. I can answer some of these questions for you. I'm happy to do that because I don't think it's a good thing that if the fire department doesn't know these answers, and so I appreciate the back and forth. The answer is that there are 110 Hatzola ambulances in New York City, some of which I've spent the last 6 years in office buying through capital for Hatzola, and by no means have I been able to do all 110, but there are 110 ambulances. Unlike fire department ambulances, Hatzola ambulances are taken out when needed, as opposed to fire department ambulances, which are done on a shift, so if there's no call, they're just sitting there and waiting for the next call. There are 1,700 Hatzola volunteers who have radios on 24/7, 300 of which are paramedics. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that 1,700 people respond to a single call, but they're also not getting paid. So that cost savings to the city when a call goes to the Hatzola system and somebody jumps into a car, goes to that call, and ultimately somebody else goes to the garage, grabs an ambulance, and goes to that call. And if it results in a transfer, that's many, many minutes that the 911 system, and I appreciate your faith in it, you say it won't collapse. I think that the facts lead to a very different conclusion. The reality is that what we're seeing in the last couple of years is response times for FD ambulances are going up, not down. And it may be by seconds, but seconds count in situations like this. So again, I'm not lobbying for you to put Hatzola volunteers on the payroll of the fire department. What I'm saying, I think, in this bill, and I'm not the inventor of this bill, this is a bill that's been around for over a decade. Predecessors of mine in this council and previous councils have introduced this. The idea is that the taxpayers are gaining from the existence of these volunteer corps all around the city. And there are some that maybe just have 1 or 2 ambulances that serve a very particular localized neighborhood. But when you have a citywide system, and this is where the comparison that I'm able to do, and I hope you are as well, with Hatzola, where from the top of the Bronx to the bottom of Staten Island and all across the city, they are able to take hundreds and hundreds of calls a day off your books. And I really think that while I admire your faith and confidence in the 911 system and in fire department's capacity to respond to emergency calls, I think it's, please accept this with respect, misplaced. It's simply something that I don't see possible given particularly the response times. And my last point, even if we were to take for granted that you're right, that it wouldn't collapse, I think that at the very least we can admit that the response times would go up at an exponential cost that we would not be able to afford in terms of life-saving. Because if it takes 5 minutes for an ambulance to show up from the fire department, and because of an influx of calls that are now being put on the fire department's books, it now takes 7, 8 minutes per call, those extra minutes are lives, and they will cost lives. So I would just urge you to consider that in your opposition to this bill, because I do think that there's a way that the taxpayers can partner a little better and can pick up some of the cost of these volunteer ambulance corps all across the city, because those systems are taking the work off the FD's books. And that's all for me. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Chief.
Thank you, Councilmember. Do any other council members have questions? We've been joined by Councilmember Carr and Councilmember Holden. Any other questions? Chief, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
We can move now to public testimony.
Thank you.
Oren Barzilay.
You want a few copies? Good morning, Committee Chairperson and Honorable Council members. My name is Oren Barzilay. I'm a 28-year veteran of FDNY EMS, and I'm the President of EMS Local 2507. I'm here today to speak on behalf of more than 4,000 uniformed FDNY EMTs, paramedics, and fire inspectors. New York's EMTs serve in the most renowned fire department in the country, perhaps one of the most renowned in the entire world. And they are tasked with responding to an incredible number of emergencies each year. In 2022, EMS responded to 1.58 million calls for medical emergencies. And according to the mayor's report, this is 100,000 calls increase from 2021. At its current pace, EMS is expected to respond to over 1.6 medical calls by year-end 2023, again surpassing the previous year. I'm here today to spotlight very considerable issues for our city EMTs who despise their pivotal role in serving and protecting New Yorkers. We are horrifically supported with resources from our city government. EMT assaults are at an all-time high, doubling in the last year, and many hundreds of our members are not even reporting them due to a lack of any action at all by both the department, the city, and the judicial system. When we arrive at the scene of an emergency, we don't carry guns like our counterparts in NYPD. We don't have access like our fire department firefighters' brethren. We roll up in the scene of an emergency with a doctor's bag to provide medical care. What is the city going to do to fix this? I urge the committee to pass legislation so that all EMTs and paramedics are not left alone in the back of an ambulance. It must be mandated for the FDNY to require a 3-man crew in an ambulance. This way, no one is ever left alone. Furthermore, all of our supervisors respond on their own without any additional resources. They also need to have an aide as well. If you're faced with such high chance of getting assaulted in your workplace, it's the employer's responsibility to keep the workforce safe. That protection of our members is absolutely not happening right now. Perhaps it's time that the city designate EMTs and paramedics as peace officers. EMS is being totally and completely starved of necessary resources to allow us to work safely and protect the city citizen at the same time. Right now, the FDNY is providing body armor and ballistic vests on a voluntary basis. The tragic uptick in stories about EMTs and paramedics being brutally assaulted is worrying and alarming. That is why we need guaranteed permanent 5-year replacement policy in the provisions of body armor. We feel strongly about keeping our members prepared for any situation or scenario, even in the case they are faced with danger. The FDNY's de-escalation and self-defense training course for emergency first responders is a good step of our members. However, it is clear that given that frequency of assaults on our members, this training needs to be more than just one and done. It needs to be mandatory yearly training. If the expectation is to keep EMTs with the FDNY while also attracting new members, there must be a sizable investment from the city that demonstrates commitment to this department. The alarming trend of surging assaults is causing our members to leave the department altogether to find work that is safer and also pays more. The dedicated women and men of EMS and the citizens we are sworn to protect absolutely deserve better protection. In closing, we are opposed to intro bill number 138. This will be a slap in the face to all the men and women in EMS. If the city can afford to pay for insurance for the privates, why can't they afford to pay us more than the minimum wage? Thank you for all your time and consideration.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for all you do for the EMS. You're a pleasure to work with. We're just going to hold for one moment, if you don't mind, because Councilmember Holden does have questions, but Councilmember Riley's here and just going to speak briefly on his bill.
Thank you, Chair Ariola, and thank you to my colleagues. I'll be brief and excuse my tardiness. Thank you, Chair Ariola and your staff for the opportunity to have this bill be heard today. I'm here as a co-sponsor of Intro 1167 with my colleague, Councilmember Eric Dinowitz, a critical piece of legislation aimed at fortifying our citywide emergency response efforts. Emergency situations demand a proactive and comprehensive approach from our city that supports and uplifts our community. Councilmember Dinowitz and I have firsthand experience navigating the immense challenges faced by families in crisis. In the wake of a devastating apartment fire in the Bronx-Wakefield section, which Councilmember Dinowitz and I serve, where 61 people were displaced in January, we witnessed a profound impact on families and the surrounding communities. The devastating impact of fires and other adversities in NYC extends beyond the physical damage, deeply affecting communities by displacing families, disrupting lives, and creating urgent needs, thus emphasizing the critical necessary need for swift and holistic support to aid the victims in their recovery. Navigating our city's service systems during such emergencies revealed immediate and severe supply challenges. This experience underscored the urgent need for accessible emergency response centers in every community district. Intro 1167 stands as a beacon of hope to address the need and significant enhance of our city emergency response infrastructure. I extend my gratitude to the 16 council members who already endorsed Intro 1167 and affirming their commitment to safeguarding vulnerable New Yorkers. I continue to urge each of my colleagues to lend their support to this crucial legislation. By signing on to this legislation, we collectively stand behind the establishment of emergency response centers citywide. I want to thank the men and women at the fire department for the hard work, the men and women with our EMS departments for their hard work as well, who helped out with this fire that took place in January, and just think that this will be an additional resource to them, to the communities that we serve each and every day. Thank you, Chair Ariola, for this opportunity to speak, and I'm looking forward to the support from my colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Riley, and thank you both for your patience. Councilmember Holden.
Thank you, Warren, and thank all you, the men and women under you, because, again, during the pandemic, they were amazing that they didn't work remotely. They couldn't work remotely, and they had all these extra hurdles to overcome. So, I thank you for your, not only your testimony, but for your service. I have some questions. You mentioned in your testimony that EMT assaults, all-time high, doubling from in the last year. Can you explain why that's happening? And do you see a trend out there? Because I do. I'll mention what I think it is, but just what you're seeing on the ground.
Ever since the bail reform was implemented, crimes, even though the reports may reflect otherwise, the crimes are up, crimes are high. People commit a crime and 2-3 hours later they're out the door, committing the same crime again. So our police officers do their best, but when they realize that the DAs are not pushing for felony assaults, which the law requires them to do, they make plea deals with them. And the public knows this.
Yeah.
The public knows that it's a revolving door with the judicial system.
So it's crime, obviously, and I went through this living in the 70s and 80s. We saw actual, arsonists trying to burn neighborhoods down, or for whatever reason. And then when the fire department responded, they bricks from the roof, and that was a regular occurrence. I don't know if you remember that, but that was a big deal. But I think it's also has to do with the lack of police. Because I was at a scene in my neighborhood, there was an accident, and EMS showed up first. And they actually said to us, cops are not going to probably even show up to this. But there was an argument ensued between a car accident, and the two drivers were at each other. In fact, my staff and I had to kind of jump in between, and so did the EMS workers to try to break it up. So it's going to get worse before it gets better, I think, because we're losing a lot of cops. We're obviously losing a lot of men and women in the EMS and EMTs, but it's going to be more stress because the response time. I have police not responding in my district to 911s. They don't even show up. And if there's a car accident, almost like the EMTs know that they're there, and that's it. Nobody else is there.
Yeah. And
many times there's an argument in a car accident, and that's why we need backup. We need police. But just the fact that we have to talk about a bulletproof vest for an EMT worker, and just the fact that we have to train, like you want training, is kind of a disgrace. That this is what our predicament is. And so you said it's doubled in the last year. Was there a trend? It was upward, that we were getting more assaults in the previous years?
So I think you raised up a very good point. When I started in the 90s, police went on majority of our calls with us. It was a deterrent when they see a police officer on scene. As the years progress, there's less and less police response to EMS calls. Be Heard is a perfect example. They don't go on mental health calls with us. These people are unstable. So yes, as we see less and less police force out there, the public gets bolder and the assaults will go up.
And many of my colleagues don't even want the police to respond to emotionally disturbed individuals, but you don't know what you're going to get. You have no idea if somebody's emotionally disturbed, you don't know if they're going to get violent at any second. And you've seen that, and your men and women have seen that on a regular basis.
That's correct.
And so that we do have a lot more people on the street that are emotionally disturbed, not only in our subways, but walking around. We all see it as New Yorkers. You're seeing it on the front lines. So that's why the city needs to respond to this, and not only just have the EMS show up. You need backup. You need a police officer there, and that's why I think we all have to. And I'm against cutting police academy classes, obviously, and recruitment more in your area because you need backup, and many times it's not the police. Maybe you need another EMS to back up you. So that's a situation I think is, like I said, it's going to get worse before it gets better. Thank you, Chair.
Any other questions from our council members? No. Oren, thank you for your testimony, and thank you for being the strongest advocate for your union. They are very lucky to have you. And we're lucky to be able to partner with you and learn from you and introduce legislation that's much needed because of our discussions, and we hope that continues. Thank you.
I appreciate it. Thank you. Is that it? Okay. Thank you.
Is there anyone else from the public that wanted to testify that may not have signed in? Okay, seeing that there isn't any, I just would like to thank our staff, our committee counsel, Josh Kingsley, our senior policy analyst, Will Hongash, who's right here beside me, and Phyllis Cirillo, my amazing chief of staff, who put all these things together and make everybody at this table look good. Thank you to the committee members and to those who testified.